Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Unfortunately, given time considerations, we received the notice of hearing within the last 2 days. The IRS was unable to prepare written testimony. I would note that I have a very brief statement before I take your questions. First and foremost, as Acting Commissioner, I want to apologize on behalf of the Internal Revenue Service for the mistakes that we made and the poor service we provided. The affected organizations and the American public deserve better. Partisanship, or even the perception of partisanship, has no place at the IRS. It cannot even appear to be a consideration in determining the tax exemption of an organization. I do not believe that partisanship motivated the people who engaged in the practices described in the Treasury Inspector General's report. I've reviewed the Treasury Inspector General's report, and I believe its conclusions are consistent with that. I think that what happened here was that foolish mistakes were made by people trying to be more efficient in their workload selection. The listing described in the report, while intolerable, was a mistake and not an act of partisanship. The agency is moving forward. It has learned its lesson. We've previously worked to correct issues in the processing of the cases described in the report, and we've implemented changes to make sure that this type of thing never happens again. Now that TIGTA has completed its fact-finding and issued its report, management will take appropriate action with respect to those responsible. I'd be happy to answer your questions.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Miller. Are you still acting director of the IRS?
I am, sir.
And were you appointed by the President of the United States to
No,
that
sir.
position? And when was that?
I was designated as acting in November of 2012.
2012. And if I'm not mistaken, you hold actually two titles, acting director of the IRS and also Deputy Commissioner for Services and Enforcement?
I do, sir.
And in your role as Deputy Commissioner for Services and Enforcement, according to the IRS website, in that capacity you direct and oversee all major decisions with regard to the tax-exempt and government entities division?
That is a division that reports to me through the tax-exempt and government entities office, yes.
So the website's accurate?
Yes.
And then who do you report to in that position, actually in both of your positions? First, as Deputy Commissioner for Services and Enforcement.
In the Deputy Commissioner role, I would report to the Commissioner, if there was one. Without a Commissioner and holding both hats, I would report to the Deputy Secretary.
Of?
Treasury.
Treasury. And is it not a violation of IRC 6103 to disclose confidential taxpayer information?
It is.
And that really applies to all taxpayer information.
I'm not quite sure what that means, to be honest.
In practice, it's basically all taxpayers. It's not just the return, it's also
6103 obligates us not to disclose taxpayer information.
Were you ever made aware in August of 2010 that a White House official in a conference call with reporters disclosed the confidential tax structure of a private company?
I probably read it in the paper, sir.
Okay. You were made aware through news reports?
I think that's probably it. It's a long time ago.
Did you take any steps when you learned of that?
I don't recall. I'm not. I don't recall. I'll have to go back down then, sir.
So you didn't inform the Inspector General of that or your superiors that you recollect?
I'm not sure why I would have to notify the superiors. It was in the papers. I don't remember whether we made a referral or I made a referral at that time.
All right. According to the Inspector General audit, the targeting of conservative groups began in March of 2010. When were you made aware?
I was aware of that on May 3rd of 2012.
And how were you made aware?
I was made aware of, not the targeting, but I was made aware of the process that was described in the TIGTA report when I asked some of our people to go out and take a look at the cases subsequent to the public discussion of overbroad letters coming out.
So that would have been in your role as acting director as well as the Deputy Commissioner for Services and Enforcement?
No, I was deputy at that time.
You were deputy at that time. And when you say you asked some of our people, who would that have been?
So I asked the senior technical advisor for tax-exempt and government entities to lead a team and take a look and see what was going on in terms of cases that had gotten those letters.
Did you inform anyone of that action that you took, or those steps?
So I did that. I asked the senior technical advisor to do that in late March 23rd or 26th, something like that. And she and her team came back to talk to me in May, and subsequent to that, I'm sure I informed the commissioner, but the commissioner was aware of the letters as well.
Did you inform anyone other than the commissioner at that time?
You mean up the chain, sir?
Yes.
I don't believe so.
Or the inspector general?
The inspector general was aware of it and had made it clear to us they were aware of it and were looking at it at that time.
Okay. Was there a time when you became aware of the IRS launching audits against conservative donors? That would have been in about May of 2010.
Yes, I don't remember the date, sir, but yeah, in that time frame. Again, there were press accounts and congressionals coming in talking about that.
And did you learn that from the press, or did you learn that from inquiries from Congress?
I don't know. It could have been either. It came up in a meeting, and then it hit the press, and so I don't know.
In any event, after learning of that information of the audits, what steps did you take?
We investigated what happened. We took a look. And ultimately, I issued a directive that said that the law in the area was not that clear, that we had not been enforcing in that area substantially since the period of I believe a 1982 or something like that revenue ruling that talked about gift tax and C4 organizations. And I said, let's not enforce right now. Let's talk about it, let's study it, and we will put out guidance, and that guidance will be prospective. I thought that was the fair thing to do, Mr. Camp.
When you say we investigated, who would that have been? And
I don't remember, but we took a look at the issue. We looked at how it happened, and I think you were looking at it as well, your committee, sir.
I mean, when you say we, what does that mean? I mean, who
the
in
IRS,
the agency?
The IRS looked at the issue.
I mean, what departments?
Would have been counsel. I don't know that it was an exempt organization. I'm sorry, sir. I'm not going to be able to answer with particularity there.
Were you ever made aware of the publication of the confidential 2008 donor list of the National Organization for Marriage, a conservative tax-exempt organization?
There was.
And when was that?
That date I'll have to get back to you on, sir.
All right.
But I remember the issue.
And how did you find out?
Don't remember. It might have been press, might have been somebody coming to us with a congressional complaint.
And when you learned of that publication, did you take any steps?
I believe we made a referral to TIGTA, yes.
At that time? And you're not sure when that referral was made?
It would have been in the same time frame.
All right. Shortly after you became aware of it?
Would have been.
Were you ever made aware of the IRS leak of confidential applications for the tax-exempt status of conservative groups to ProPublica?
I was.
Again, when were you made aware of that?
Again, sir, I'm not going to be able to give you a perfect timeline, but when approximately the time that it became public is when I became aware, so that you would know that from the timeline.
Did you inform anyone else of that?
I believe the service informed TIGTA at that time, yes.
In each of these instances I've asked you about, did you ever come forward and inform the Congress?
I don't believe so, unless it came up in conversation or testimony. Can I suggest something, Mr. Camp, on those two, just to let you know?
This would be the National Organization for Marriage and the ProPublica?
Those two situations, we went to TIGTA, and I think Mr. George can speak to what they found. We made the referrals, and I believe what they found was that those disclosures were inadvertent, and that there's been discipline in one of those cases for somebody not following procedures. But I will obviously let Mr. George speak to that.
But you never informed the Congress of any of these things that you're aware of?
They
any
were
of these
in,
items I've asked you about this morning?
They were in the press, sir.
All right. Well, obviously, you know, the IRS mission statement says that the role of the IRS is to help America's taxpayers understand and meet their tax responsibilities and enforce the law with integrity and in fairness to all. And I think clearly your mission is not being met. Mr. George, I guess I would just have one last question, Mr. Miller. When asked the truth, and you know the truth, and you have a legal responsibility to inform others of the truth, but you don't share that truth, what is that called?
I always answer questions truthfully, Mr. Camp.
All right, Mr. George, were you ever made aware of the alleged disclosure of the confidential tax structure of a private company?
We have been alerted to.
You personally were made aware of it?
To one in specific or in general?
You specifically.
To a specific company or in general?
It was a specific company, but there was a disclosure of taxpayer information. The confidential tax structure, as you know, any information is considered confidential. It was particularly the tax structure of a private company. Were you made aware of that public disclosure?
We are made aware of public disclosure of information that is protected by Title 26, Section 6103, yes.
Are you aware of the instance I'm referring to?
The one that you referred to?
Yes.
I am aware of that, yes.
Okay, and when were you made aware of that?
I don't have the exact date, sir.
Okay, how were you made aware of that?
I believe it came through my Office of Investigations, or it could have been put through our hotline. That I'm not completely certain of.
So you don't believe you learned of it from an IRS employee?
I generally do not, below the commissioner or deputy commissioner levels, interact with the average IRS employee. It goes through a chain of
that would include the commissioner.
Well, yes.
So no IRS employee informed you of this information?
Most likely it would have come from one of my principal deputies, and they may have received that information from someone, I don't believe at the commissioner level, but it may have been at the deputy commissioner level.
But you're not aware, you can't tell us for sure?
That at this time I cannot, sir.
Were you ever made aware of the alleged publication of a confidential 2008 donor list of the National Organization for Marriage?
I both read in the newspapers allegations to that effect, but I have to make it clear, Mr. Chairman, that the Internal Revenue Code has very strict rules as it relates to the way that confidential taxpayer information is revealed, and we at TIGTA are the ones to enforce those rules. So I have to be very careful as to exactly how I respond and whether or not I can even acknowledge publicly some of these revelations that you're inquiring about.
Did you respond to that information?
A review has been taken.
Is it ongoing?
I will have to confer with my colleague if you'll give me a moment. Is it ongoing? Yes or no? It is not ongoing.
All right. There are daily reports of new allegations of IRS misconduct, political targeting, and it's clear that more work needs to be done. Is your office continuing to investigate these allegations?
Yes, we are, sir.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Levin is recognized.
Thank you very much. I want to go on to other things, but the incidents that Mr. Camp has been talking about, the disclosure, what years were those, Mr. Miller?
Again, sir, I apologize for not having the date at hand. They have been a couple of years now, I believe.
A couple of years. Who was the commissioner at that time?
I believe it was Mr. Schulman.
Who appointed Mr. Schulman?
Mr. Bush.
All right, let me start with two key issues. There's no question about the inappropriate criteria. I want to focus on that. But let me first ask right up front, if I might. Mr. Russell, during the course of your audit, were you allowed access to everyone you were requested to interview?
To my knowledge, we were not denied access to anyone.
Did you interview employees in both Cincinnati and in D.C.?
Correct. Yes, we did, sir.
On page 7, Mr. George, of the IG report, it states, and I quote, "All of these individuals stated that the criteria were not influenced by any individual or organization outside the IRS." Is that correct?
That is the information that we received. Correct, sir.
Did you find any evidence of political motivation in the selection of the tax exemption applications?
We did not, sir.
Mr. Miller, during your review of this matter, you indicated when you started it, did you find any evidence of political motivation on the part of employees involved in processing the applications at issue?
We did not, sir.
If we could put on the screen the organizational chart, is that possible from the report? Someone going to do that?
I have it there somewhere, Russell.
It's called High Level Organizational Report.
Thank you.
Mr. Miller, in 2010, the inappropriate criteria that singled out applications for tax-exempt status by name was developed by what office?
It would be developed by an office that actually is not on here, but is on page 2 of this, is under Lois Lerner's jurisdiction.
And where are those employees located?
For the most part, they are located in Cincinnati. There's about 140 folks who do this sort of work in Cincinnati. There are a handful of people around the country that report into Cincinnati as well.
In 2011, the report finds that the Director of Exempt Organizations, EO on this chart, and I'm afraid it's not on the screen yet, this is Ms. Lerner's position, became aware of the inappropriate criteria. She ordered the criteria changed, and it was changed in 2011 to no longer refer by name Tea Party or Patriot. Mr. George, is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
Mr. Miller, as then deputy, were you aware of the problem with the criteria in June and July of 2011?
I was not, sir.
In January 2012, the criteria were changed again to, and I quote, "organizations involved in limiting, expanding government, educating on the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and social economic reform movement." The IG's report indicates that this change was again made in the Cincinnati Determinations Office without executive approval. Mr. George, is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
It was changed without executive approval?
That is our understanding.
The May 2012 criteria are in place today. It states organizations with indicators of significant amounts of political campaign intervention. The IG report states that, in quotes, it more clearly focuses on the activities permitted under the Treasury regulations. Mr. George, is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
I have no further. My time is up.
All right. At this time, I'll yield to the chairman of the Oversight Subcommittee, Dr. Bustani.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Miller, on March 22nd of 2012, the Oversight Subcommittee held a hearing in this room, and I specifically asked then Commissioner Schulman about reports that the IRS had been targeting Tea Party groups and other conservative groups. And I would like to play the video of his response. Can we have the video?
There's absolutely no targeting. This is the kind of back and forth that happens when people apply for 501c4s.
This was in March 22nd of 2012. Knowing what you know now, was Commissioner Schulman's response truthful?
It was incorrect, but whether it was untruthful or not, look, when you talk about targeting, and we should really get into this, Dr. Bustani, because when you talk about targeting, it's a pejorative term. What happened here was, and I'm not defending the list, but what happened here, and I would like to go through the application process, what happened here is that someone saw some Tea Party cases come through. They were acknowledging that they were going to be engaged in politics. This was the time frame in 2010 when Citizens United was out. There was a lot of discussion in the system about the use of C4s. People in Cincinnati decided, let's start grouping these cases. Let's centralize these cases. The way they centralized it, troublesome. The concept of centralization, not. And it's not. We're not targeting these people in that sense. What we are doing is making sure that we bring them in and have people.
Well, let me ask you this: you said incorrect, but not untruthful.
Yeah, I don't.
Does that mean he was not informed? Was he not informed of this process?
To my knowledge, I don't believe he knew at the time.
Because in March, you sent a technical advisor to Cincinnati. There were press reports. There were letters from Chairman Camp and myself dating back to 2011. And so clearly there was congressional interest in this issue, press reports, and you're saying he was not informed of this?
So let's divide the world into a couple of pieces here. There is the list that was used, and there was the processing of the cases. At that time, we were aware that there were issues in the processing of the cases. We were not aware of the list. I asked in late March, actually after the hearing, I believe, for us to go in and take a look because I thought there were problems in processing of the cases. They came back with both pieces. Yes, there were problems with processing of the cases, and there were problems with the listing.
Okay, so at this, you were given a complete briefing on this improper selection based on political beliefs, and this briefing was, I think you said May 3rd of 2012. Is that correct?
So I would recharacterize your question, sir. I was informed of what we had found out to date. TIGTA was in there at the time. I was told that there was a use of the list. The list seemed obnoxious to us, as it does to you.
Okay. And
we were going to take actions on that. And yes, that was in May.
And you say it was not targeting, but why was only one side of the political spectrum singled out in this?
So I think what happened was they were, look, they get 70,000 applications in there for 150 or 200 people to do. They triage those. People look at them and they send them either through the system because they're okay, into a mix of folks so that they can get technically fixed up, and some go for substantive questions. Politics is an area where we always ask more questions. It is our obligation under law to do so. As Mr. George indicated,
right. No, I understand the
501c3 organization can't do it, and a C4 organization can do some of it. And it's our obligation.
Mr. Miller, we've received letters describing process, but we're trying to get to the heart of this matter. And at the briefing in May of 2012, you were told that tax-exempt applications were being targeted if they contained terms such as Tea Party, We the People, Patriots, and so forth, many of the terms that Chairman Camp referenced. And knowing these practices, knowing that you sent letters to Congress acknowledging our investigation of these allegations, but consistently omitted that such discriminatory practices that are alleged were actually, in fact, taking place. Why did you mislead Congress and the American people on this?
Mr. Chairman, I did not mislead Congress nor the American people. I answered the questions as they were asked.
Why didn't you tell us about the terms?
Time has expired. Mr. Crowley is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. George, you are the Inspector General at the Treasury, is that correct?
Actually, there are 3 Inspectors Generals within the Department of the Treasury. I'm the Inspector General exclusively focused on the IRS, on the System of Tax Administration.
Oh, the IRS. Very good. And you were appointed by then President Bush, is that correct?
Yes, correct.
And you state in your report that no one outside the IRS was involved in this political targeting of not-for-profit organizations. Is that correct?
That is the finding of this particular audit, sir.
Your audit, your findings are that no outside groups were involved, correct?
Of this particular, yes, as of now, that's our conclusion.
Mr. George, who was the last presidentially appointed IRS commissioner?
It was Douglas Schulman.
Douglas Schulman, correct?
Yes, correct.
Appointed by then President George W. Bush, is that
Yes,
correct?
that's correct, sir.
And Mr. Schulman was commissioner when these improper and outrageous activities that both sides of the aisle recognize as being outrageous and improper when they occurred. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Mr. George, prior to Commissioner Schulman, the last political head or political appointee of the IRS was Mr. Mark Everson. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
He was also appointed by President George W. Bush?
Yes, I believe so.
And during his tenure, it's widely believed that groups like the NAACP, progressive churches that were in opposition to the war in Iraq, and environmental groups were targeted of the IRS. Mr. Miller, while you were appointed acting commissioner at the IRS, you are not a career, you are a career civil servant. Is that not the case?
It is, sir.
And you were not a political appointee?
I am not a political appointee.
But what I'm trying to point out and basically to debunk is the notion or idea of the political statements and I believe non-factual statements by Chairman Camp to link these scandals to the White House or solely the targeting of conservative groups. I was the person last week who asked the question of Ms. Lerner as to whether or not the IRS were investigating political non-for-profit organizations, and at that hearing, we were not given an answer. I think Mr. Bustani would agree. Rather, the world only learned after she was asked a planting question at a press event, and that's simply unacceptable. But what I also think is important is to keep this in at least at this point in time, I would hope, in a non-partisan and maybe a bipartisan context, because we want to find the facts. We want to find out who knew what, when, and why steps were or were not taken. I was as outraged when I learned that when she was asked the question why she did not tell Congress when she was before Congress, her response apparently was no one ever asked her. I asked her, and she didn't answer the question. So we're all outraged. We're all upset about this. I don't believe, nor do any of my colleagues believe, that any organization, political organization, should be targeted solely because of their thought.
Right.
That's on both sides of the spectrum. And I would dare say, during the prior administration by Mr. Schulman and Mr. Everson, that there was targeting of political entities as well. That has to end. That has to end on both sides. And the president has been very forthright and very strongly condemning that type of action, as the entire administration has, as is Mr. Liu. So I would really ask the chairman and my colleagues on the other side, let's get the answers. Ask the questions, get the facts, and then we can draw our own conclusions. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Mr. Brady's recognized.
Chairman, thank you for getting to the truth in this scandal. Let's look at one of the Tea Party groups in my community. The founder, a small businesswoman, originally filed for tax-exempt status in July of 2010. Fully 20 months later, in February 2012, she received a letter from the IRS with numerous follow-up questions, a lot of them intrusive, but she answered every one of them and returned it well within the 2-week time window. Now, almost 3 years to the day that she first filed, her application is still pending. But let's look at what happened to her in the 3 years since she applied. Beginning in December 2010, she was visited by the FBI Domestic Terrorism Unit. Her personal returns and her business returns were both audited by the IRS. She received 4 FBI inquiries. In her business, received unsolicited audits, unscheduled audits by OSHA, the Commissioner on Environmental Quality, and the ATF twice. Now, this is a citizen and a small businesswoman who had never been audited by the IRS or any of these agencies until she applied to you for tax-exempt status for her Tea Party. The broader question here, is this still America? Is this government so drunk on power that it would turn its full force, its full might, to harass and intimidate and threaten an average American who only wants her voice and their voices heard? Mr. Miller, who in the IRS is responsible for targeting conservative organizations?
So let me first say I cannot speak to a given case, and that we've talked about 6103, but that's...
This is not just one case. You know we're talking about the whole list the Inspector General put up there.
Correct.
Who is responsible for targeting these groups?
So again, I'm going to take exception to the concept of targeting because it's a loaded term. The listing was done.
This was not a listing. You created a be on the lookout list.
Yeah.
That's not a centralized government mandated or directed listing. You had a be on the lookout list that you acknowledge. You have the cases the Inspector General already verified. So the question remains, who is responsible for targeting these conservative organizations?
So again, and I think if you look at the TIGTA report, it answers your question.
There are no names in the Inspector General's report. So I'm asking you, not only as the acting commissioner, but as the deputy commissioner over this organization, who is responsible for targeting these individuals?
So I don't have names for you, Mr. Brady, and I'm willing to try to find that out. I think TIGTA is looking at that right now. I don't think targeting, again, is wrong.
You're telling us you have no knowledge of who initiated or who approved this targeting of conservative organizations?
I will stand by what the TIGTA report has put out there as the facts.
Can you assure this committee that none of the information provided to the IRS by these groups was shared or given to any other federal agency?
That would be a violation of law, and I do not believe that happens.
You can assure us there was absolutely no sharing of this information with other government agencies?
TIGTA and others will look at that, but I would be shocked, Congressman, if that happened. Shocked.
If your earlier answers are any indication, we will all read about it in the media. We ought to be getting the truth from you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Rangel is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. These that we all are outraged about occurred under the Bush appointees as well as the Obama appointees.
There were no Obama appointees, so under Mr. Schulman. Although I'm not sure. I apologize, Mr. Rangel. I'm not sure what are we talking about. The
people
list?
That were once it was discovered that people were put under a list, a lookout list, that type of thing. Regardless of what you call it, were the people responsible in Treasury Department appointed by Mr. President Bush as well as continued service under President Obama? It was basically the question that Mr. Crawley was asking about.
At the IRS, the commissioner was appointed under the Bush administration. Obviously, at Treasury, those would be at Main Treasury. Those individuals would be Obama appointees.
What I'm trying to say, this outrage is not Democrat and Republican. It involves the credibility of government as relates to American citizens. Now, the president has indicated outrage. You have indicated outrage. So I would assume that we're on the same side in trying to determine how did this happen, who was responsible for it, how far did this cancer go, how quickly can we cut it out so that tens of thousands of IRS employees have the stigma of corruption taken away from them. That you, Mr. Miller, who is a career employee, don't have to explain to your kids and friends that you are not involved in a scandal, that all of the people that serve the government, it's too late for the Congress, but it's not too late for the government to try to get its reputation cleaned up for America. So I don't want to see anger with you two, but I certainly hope before this hearing is over that you share with us how you intend to have your voices heard so that America would know that whether this was criminal activity or mistake, I don't know, but we have to get on with it. Now, under 501c4, we're supposed to allow political activity to take place, meaning that you can make political donations without saying how much and who made the donations, right?
I think if I could restructure it, under 501c4 organizations, donors and their contributions are not public information, if that was the question.
So you can make political contributions.
You can make contributions to 501c4 that are used for political purposes.
Yes, and you can do this as long as it's not the primary purpose. You can do this for 49% of whatever the activities are without technically violating the law. Is that not correct?
The test is whether your primary activities are social welfare in nature.
And primary means that technically you could do 49% political.
So we've never been that precise.
I know, but I'm asking, you could say that.
Yes.
And after the Supreme Court decision in Citizens Union, there was an, what? United, whatever. The applications for this type of corporations increased dramatically, did it not?
They did double, yes, sir.
So you don't have to be a political expert to know that there was an increase in political donations given to 501c4s.
And I think that if one looks at the reporting on the Forms 990 of political activities and the money spent, it will show an explosion in that money as well, yes, sir.
And so, again, it's almost an invitation as the law is written for abuse in terms of political activities for corporations that primarily are supposed to be doing a social service work. Is that not correct?
It is something that we have to look at closely, yes, sir.
I mean, you should have wanted to look at this earlier before this, what my friends call a scandal. I mean, this is wrong to abuse the tax system. This screams out for tax reform, does it not?
I think it's an area ripe for redefinition and reform, yes, sir.
Well, regardless of whether Democrats or Republicans did something like this, the outrage should still be there. Is that not correct?
If the outrage as to
the abuse.
Yes.
This section of the law has been abused by government employees, not by all of them, but by some of them. And our job is to find out who they are. And all I want to get from you, Mr. Miller, and you, Mr. George, that is your integrity that's on the line. It's the president's, it's the administration's, it is the IRS employees that work hard each and every day. And unfortunately, it's the Congress that's involved in this. People are losing confidence in our government, and I hope that you feel the same sense to find out what caused this, how it could happen, and help us to restore the confidence that Americans should have in their government.
All right, thank you.
The balance of my
Thank you. Mr. Ryan's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, we have now established, and you've acknowledged, that you were briefed on May 3rd that there was improper criteria used for tax-exempt applications. At the briefing in May 3rd, you were told that tax-exempt applications were being targeted if they contained terms such as Tea Party, We the People, Patriots, Bill of Rights, Constitution, government spending, taxes, and those that criticized how the country was run. After that, knowing of these practices, you sent letters to Congress acknowledging our investigation of these allegations, but omitted that the discriminatory practices were alleged, in fact, taking place. Then, remember, this briefing took place May of 2012. Then you came here to a subcommittee hearing on this issue on July 25th, where we are investigating the discriminatory filters used to hold up the 501c4 applications of groups. Specifically, You were told that these conservative groups felt like they were being harassed, and you were asked this question, quote, what kind of letter or action is taking place at this time that you are aware of? And then knowing full well that these filters were being used to target certain groups, you said, and I quote, I am aware that some 200 501c4 applications fell into this category, the determination letter process. We did group these organizations together to ensure consistency, to ensure quality. We continue to work those cases, close quote. That was your answer to this committee after you had received the briefing that these targeting was occurring, which you just earlier acknowledged was outrageous. Now, the law governing how you must respond to congressional inquiries requires you to tell not only the truth, but to tell the whole truth. You, quote, cannot conceal or cover up by any trick, scheme, or device a material fact. How was that not misleading this committee? You knew the targeting was taking place. You knew the terms Tea Party patriots were being used. You just acknowledged a minute ago that they were outrageous. And then when you were asked about this, after you were briefed about this, that was the answer you gave us? How can we not conclude that you misled this committee?
So that was a lot of questions, sir.
It's one. How can we conclude that you did not mislead this committee?
I did not mislead the committee. I stand by my answer then. I stand by my answer now. Harassment discussion that was part of that question implies political motivation. There is a discussion going on. There is no political motivation.
Let me ask it again.
May I answer the question, sir?
I'm going to help you, give you some clarity here. Here's the question you were asked. What kind of letter or action is being taken place at this time that you are aware of?
So the discussion of the context of that, and again, we need to go back and look at the context. There was the listing. There was the treatment of the cases. My understanding of that question was the treatment of the cases because all of the letters, and he was talking, I think it was Mr. Marchand, was talking about I'm hearing that people are complaining about letters. My response was to that. We found out about those letters. We dealt with them. As has been explained, we gave more time. We went and talked to them about expanding the way they could answer it, and we dealt, I think, fairly and successfully with the donor list issue.
You knew of our concern of this targeting. You knew of the allegations that had been reported to this committee. We brought you here to talk about it. You had received a briefing that this targeting was taking place, but you did not divulge that to this committee when we were asking you questions about this. You said in your answer that you were aware some 200 501c4 applications fell into this, quote, category. We did these groupings together to ensure consistency, to ensure quality. We continue to work those cases. You didn't mention targeting based on ideology. You didn't mention targeting based on buzzwords like Tea Party or Patriots or 9/12. You knew that, but you didn't mention this to the committee. Do you not think that that's a very incomplete answer?
I answered the question truthfully.
All right, let me ask you one more question. You just gave us a list the other day of approved tax-exempt applications for advocacy organizations through 2009 May. We don't know how long these applications sat or how long it took to process them. Just from Mr. Rango's questioning and from earlier testimony, the IRS was doing this because they were concerned about political activities by nonprofits. That's the debate that seems to be taking place here. Some of these that were approved were Chattanooga Organized for Action, the Progressive Leadership Alliance, and the Progressive USA. If you were concerned about political activity, did you have targeting lists that contain words like progressive or organizing in their names?
So let me let's step back again and let me walk you through the process. We centralized cases based on political activity evidenced in the file. We took a shortcut on some of it, but we collected, to be blunt, more than Tea Party cases. Mr. George's own report.
There were no progressive or organizing words that were used for targeting. Is that correct?
That's correct. We collected more people because anytime it was seen that political activity was part of the file, it went into...
Time has expired. Mr. McDermott's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. These days, Congress can't seem to agree on whether the sun is shining, but this issue has brought us together in a way unlike anything you've seen here. We all agree these applications were poorly handled and that the IRS stiff-armed us, basically, at best, when we asked about it. Our public servants ought to be held to a higher standard, and none more so than the agency that oversees and enforces the tax collection. The IRS is an easy target, and everybody wants to get a pitchfork when the tax man comes. But with our 24-hour media cycle passing around lighter fluid, it's getting harder and harder to get to the facts and fix what really is going on here. There's a difference in my mind between stupid mistakes and malicious mistakes. The overwhelming majority of applications for tax-free status for political activities were from far-right groups. And examiners took a shortcut, which they clearly regret, deeply regret. The report says in black and white on page 7, quote, the determination unit employees stated that they considered the Tea Party criterion as a shorthand term for all potential political cases, close quote. These applications were singled out for their names and policy positions, not for the activities, which is really what they should have been singled out for. Some of these political groups were delayed in getting their taxpayer status, and that was wrong. Much as I dislike the right, I think it's wrong to be uneven-handed in government application. The Inspector General report says that no one acted out of malice or political motivation. Mr. George, I want to know, do you still stand?
What we would be getting.
It is not a fascist takeover that's going on here of the healthcare system. And let's not forget that the IRS has one of the hardest and most hated jobs, and there are thousands and thousands of good, solid, hardworking Americans who work every day to run the system. And a couple of people make a problem, that does not damage the organization in my view. You get rid of the people who made the problem. But I would really like to hear from Mr. Miller, what do you need that would make it so that this wouldn't have happened before?
So there are two things, sir, and I appreciate the kind words for our people because we were an incredibly hardworking and honest group, frankly, and that seems to be forgotten in all this. With respect to political activity, it would be a wonderful thing to get better rules, to get more clear rules, and in terms of our ability to get to this work, it would be good to have a little budget that would allow us to get more than the number of people we have to do 70,000 applications and to do our job in looking at whether an organization is tax exempt or not.
All right, time has expired. Mr. Nunes is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Miller, do you know the director of the IRS's Exempt Organizations Division, Lois Lerner?
I do, sir.
Are you aware that she testified before this committee last Wednesday on May 8th?
I believe I was.
Are you aware that she did not acknowledge this investigation at the time?
Actually, I do not know that, but I was engaged in other testimony that day.
Were you aware that the IRS was preparing a statement to put out during this time last week?
Yeah. I don't know
this?
whether we knew at that time or not.
Wouldn't have Ms. Lerner known that at the time last week when she testified before this committee?
Don't know that.
Did you know that Ms. Lerner was going to appear last Friday, May 10th, on a panel called News from the IRS and Treasury at the American Bar Association Conference?
I knew she was appearing. I did not know the topic.
Did you or any of your subordinates direct Lois Lerner to make the public statement at the panel discussion acknowledging the targeting of tax-exempt groups?
It was a prepared Q&A.
Do you know Miss Celia Rohde, a member of IRS's Advisory Council on Tax-Exempt and Government Entities?
I do.
Was Miss Rohde's question to Miss Lerner about targeting conservative groups planned in advance?
I believe that we talked about that, yes.
Did you ever have any contact, either by email, phone, or in person, with the White House regarding the targeting of tax-exempt groups from 2010 until today?
Absolutely not.
How about the Department of Treasury?
I certainly would have had some conversations with Treasury in my role as acting commissioner because I reported to them. On this topic, it would have been, I believe, I have to go back and look, but very recent that that conversation would have taken place.
How about President Obama's re-election campaign?
No.
Did you ever have any contact with anyone associated with Organizing for America or its nonprofit successor, Organizing for Action?
No.
Did you ever have any contact with anyone associated with ProPublica?
I don't believe so, but there was, when this whole thing came out, that was previously referenced, I think the IRS might have talked to them, yes.
Something that would probably clarify your involvement in any of this, Mr. Miller, would be if you submitted to this committee your emails, phone records, and personal schedule from 2010 until you resign. Would you be willing to do that?
I'll have to see what's legally appropriate.
You know, we could subpoena those records.
I understand. And I'll have to talk to my lawyers in the agency. I'm just saying I don't know. You're asking me, and then, we'll talk.
Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that we work hard to get those records. I would also encourage you to contact Ms. Rohde and Ms. Lerner to testify before this committee at our earliest possible time. I just have one last question, Mr. Miller. You really are not taking any acknowledgement that you knew anything, that you didn't do anything wrong. You've said that numerous times on the record today, that you did nothing wrong. So I find it hard to believe, why did you resign, or why are you resigning?
I never said I didn't do anything wrong, Ms. Nunes. What I said is contained in the questions. I resigned because as the acting commissioner, what happens in the IRS, whether I was personally involved or not, stops at my desk. And so I should be held accountable for what happens. Whether I was personally involved or not, a very different question, sir.
Well, I hope that you would be willing to submit all your emails, phone records, any personal meetings that you had in the last 4 years, and I think that would really, keep your reputation in good standing with this committee and the American people.
Well, obviously, we'll have to talk about that, but I'm not saying no. I'm not. I just don't know.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Neal is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, earlier you referenced an article from USA Today, and I would like, for the purpose of this hearing, to insert an article from Bloomberg News that appeared on May 14th indicating that there were Democratic-leaning organizations that were the focus of the IRS as well.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, when I woke up this morning, as I do just about every morning now, I went to my phone and I was curious about what the word of the day would be. And the word of the day, because Merriam-Webster is located in my hometown, and Mr. Miller, you've rejected the term targeted. Is that correct?
I think it's a term that implies something that didn't exist here.
Okay. Let me draw you into the weeds based upon what Merriam-Webster, by sheer irony this morning, suggested, and that is they use the term litmus test, which they define as a single factor, as an attitude, event, or a fact that is decisive in choosing these organizations. Would you say that there was a litmus test?
No, sir. It was the litmus test, if any, was political activity.
Political, okay. I have one of my constituents who contacted my office yesterday outlining a pretty egregious situation. He's treasurer of a small nonprofit in Massachusetts, a volunteer organization, I should note. And their association was told by the IRS and employees that they were not required to file a Form 990 because of their small size, so they didn't file one. This past November, they received a letter from the IRS saying that their tax-exempt status had been revoked for failure to file the necessary forms without any advance notice. So the IRS told them they no longer needed to file the forms, but instead of notifying them first about the problem and allowing them to fix it, especially in light of the advice they were given by IRS, the IRS just went ahead and revoked their tax-exempt status. They now have to reapply and pay. This is a nonprofit that's been around for 60 years. Now, taxpayers should not be intimidated by the IRS. There's broad agreement on that today. The American people should not be afraid of the IRS. There's broad agreement on that today. But we should be able to rely on advice that they provide and not be punished for it. So I hope that we're going to have an opportunity to work on this specific constituent issue. But I want to turn to a topic of recent focus by the IRS, and that's obviously the question today, and it's the allegation that is their political views that have caused them to become that focus. We all know that's outrageous and unacceptable, and a thorough review will get us to the bottom of this and ensure that it never happens again. But let's not forget something this morning. Even with the egregious actions that have been acknowledged by the IRS, there's still an underlying problem here, and that's 501c4s being engaged in politics. After Citizens United, the IRS was flooded with applications, as you've indicated, seeking 501c4 status. And why was that? In large part because super PACs must disclose their donors while 501c4s do not. As policymakers, we have many disagreements on this committee and between the parties. However, I think that we should be able to agree on that whole notion of disclosure. Now, the case that unleashed the torrent of money in public life was Buckley versus Vallejo in 1976, which the court held that money enabled speech. But a caveat included in that opinion, which, while never fully acknowledged, probably was written by Justice Brennan, quote, the suggestion that sunlight is said to be the best of disinfectants, electric light the most efficient policeman. So as part of our scrutiny, I think that we all ought to be able to agree, based upon this problem here today, that the simple act of transparency and disclosure would alleviate much of what has happened here. There wasn't this rush because they wanted to join the Sisters of Mercy in common cause for the purpose of engaging politics. It was in many instances to hide the donors. Now, I'm hoping that we can get to the bottom of this in fuller context, but I want to ask you specifically, Commissioner, has anyone been disciplined directly related to this development, review, approval, and use of inappropriate criteria? And have any actions, corrective actions, been put in place to ensure that this has not happened again?
So let me walk through, and the answer to that is yes. What happened in May when I was told this, I asked the management there to reassign an individual who had been involved in these letters that were objectionable. I also asked for oral counseling to be given to the person who we thought at the time was responsible for the listing. I also was aware that TIGTA was looking at this, and as I mentioned in my statement, now that they're out with the facts, we will be able to look again. I should note, just because, Mr. Camp, this is I got to be very careful here. The oral counseling that was provided, it turned out that that person may not have been involved. So what was done in lieu of that was all the managers in that group were brought in and walked through the new processes and explained that this was no way to behave as the IRS. The last thing is, sir, is that in terms of the future, the listing cannot be done and cannot be changed absent a very high level of approval at the executive level.
All right, thank you. Mr. T-Berry is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Miller, in January of 2010, an organization called Liberty Township Tea Party in Ohio applied for tax-exempt status. There's no resolution of their application to this day. Liberty Township Tea Party received 35 questions, I've got them in front of me, in March of 2011, but really there were 94 questions when you look at all the sub-questions. The letter directs the applicant to provide, under penalty of perjury, some of the following information: copies of all activity on Facebook and Twitter, resumes of all past and present employees, whether a past or present employee or their family members plans to run for office in the future. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit a copy of a Columbus Dispatch article from yesterday that references this, and in fact, Mr. Chairman, in the article, I quote a board member from Liberty Township Tea Party, who's actually in the audience today, Tim Savaglio, quote, "We're an educational group," Savaglio said. "We don't have a paid staff. We don't take stands. We don't endorse candidates. We don't man phone banks. We don't do any of those kinds of political activities." Mr. Miller, question...
Without objection, the article will be placed in the
record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Miller, question 26 of the IRS questionnaire to the Tea Party group is as follows. Provide details regarding your relationship with Justin Binnick Thomas, an American citizen who is in the audience today who still doesn't know why he was question number 26. The dispatch article goes on to say Binnick Thomas said he was shocked when he found out that the IRS was asking questions about him of a group he barely knew. He'd been involved in the Cincinnati Tea Party. He'd even served as a spokesman, but he said he had not worked with the Liberty Township Tea Party. Quote, "The obvious question that comes to mind are, why am I being targeted amongst all the others? Where does this information go in the end? Clearly it's housed in the IRS, but does it get shared with other government agencies? Do I get an audit? If I do, is it against my business?" All of those things go through your mind. Now, to this day, he doesn't know why his name is question number 26 for an organization who still hasn't received approval since January of 2010. Now, the article goes on to say Democratic Governor Ted Strickland, Ohio, former governor of Ohio, his top aides, who I know, very political, filed for tax-exempt status as a 501c3 organization in August of 2011. They were approved 9 months later. Mr. Miller, another organization in Ohio, the Ohio Liberty Coalition. This is their part of their documents in response to IRS requests. This is only part of it. And all these documents weren't enough for the IRS to approve their application. And in fact, Tom Z, who's a former president of the organization, who is here today, said that they applied in June 2010. They finally received approval. This wasn't enough, by the way. In December of 2012, 1 month after the November election. There's another lady I met in the group, in the audience from Ohio, Fremont, Ohio, who indicated that her group had a book club. And the IRS demanded a list of all the books that they had read and a book report from the group explaining what was in the books that they read. You can't make this stuff up. This is unbelievable. Now, Mr. Miller, I don't know how you can defend any of this, and I don't know how you can say that it's not political when the liberal group got a exempt status and 3 that I just mentioned didn't for over 2 years. Mr. Nunes mentioned Ms. Lerner. Who was her boss in 2011 and 2012? Who did she report to?
I believe it would have been
Sarah Ingram, maybe?
Part of that time, and part of that time another gentleman.
Okay, and that other gentleman has since submitted his resignation?
I believe so.
And what is Ms. Ingram doing today? What's her job title?
She works on implementing the Affordable Care Act.
Okay, who promoted her to that position?
I would have moved her into that position.
Why would you promote somebody to that position who was in charge of the exempt organization division, which certainly has had some controversy over the last couple years, under an investigation?
Because she's a superb civil servant, sir.
So she had nothing to do with this?
I wouldn't imagine so. By the way, I can't speak to individual cases. I can say generally, we provided horrible customer service here. I will admit that. We did. Horrible customer service.
You
Whether it was politically motivated or not is a very different question.
You targeted an individual, an American who still doesn't know to this day why he was question number 26.
All right, time has expired. Mr. Becerra is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your testimony. And let me key off of something, Mr. Miller, you said. You said foolish mistakes were made. I think the president actually said it better. He said that the handling of those tax-exempt applications in that process at the IRS was outrageous and intolerable. No excuse. And as much as we know that the folks at IRS have a thankless job because they have to go and tell their fellow Americans that they may be audited or they have to do this work understaffed, we have to maintain the confidence in the system because it's a voluntary system of payment of our taxes.
Agreed.
And so you are right, it was a foolish mistake, but the president's even more correct that it was outrageous and intolerable. Now, let me also focus on something, Mr. George, you said. When you were asked, was there any finding or evidence of political motivation here, you said no.
That's correct, sir.
Okay. And so what we find is a situation where inexcusable activity took place because it erodes the confidence of the American people in a system where they participate voluntarily. And if there's a place in public service where you have to have the highest level of conduct and standards, it's at the IRS. And so, Mr. Miller, I think it's unfortunate for those who are in positions of authority, but the buck has to stop somewhere, and I think that's exactly what we're saying. That should not diminish the good work that has been done by anyone within the IRS over the years. And so I hope you understand that you are here today talking to us because we need to get to the bottom of this. We need to clean up and clear out so we can go back to the business of making sure that people respect the fact that we have a voluntary system of paying our taxes. Having said that, let me ask a question of Mr. George. In your report, you indicate that, and I think I'm quoting correctly here, there appeared to be some confusion by the determinations unit specialists and applicants on what activities are allowed by Internal Revenue Code Section 501 or allowed by IRC 501c4 organizations. We believe this could be due to the lack of specific guidance on how to determine the, quote, primary activity, end quote, of a C4 organization. Treasury regulations state that C4 organizations should have social welfare as the primary activity of their mission. However, the regulations do not define how to measure whether social welfare is an organization's primary activity. So, Mr. George, a question. Could some of these delays in processing some of these applications have been avoided if there were clear guidance on Section 501c4 organizations and what their primary activity constitutes?
Direct answer is yes, sir, but I should also note that that determinations unit did seek clarity from Washington headquarters, and it took months before they received a response.
And that's a great way then to lead to Mr. Miller. I think what we've been saying for quite some time, many of us, is that there is not clarity in what is social welfare. So you have many C4 organizations, these nonprofit organizations, the good guys I'll call them, who are trying to do good work, and they're being tainted by some of these organizations that are out there and doing nothing more than political activity because the Supreme Court gave them license now to go ahead and use a nonprofit status to go out there and do politics. Is the law clear, Mr. Miller, in your mind on what is political campaign activity?
No, it's very difficult, sir.
Can you distinguish between Section 501c4 organizations and, say, a Section 527 political organization?
That's difficult, but presumably the level of political activities and expenditures needs to be less in the 501c4 area.
Let me then suggest to you, Mr. Miller, to go back in your opportunity with your fellow employees at the IRS, and Mr. George, you in your capacity as our Inspector General, and thank you for your service, to please communicate that we need to get you all to give us your sense of what is the best guidance so we don't have this proliferation of organizations that are abusing of the nonprofit status at taxpayer expense because they get all these write-offs, so that we won't run into this situation again and the American people can have confidence in their system and in their government. I thank you, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance.
Thank you. Mr. Reichert's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Miller, I have, of course, like about 15 minutes to question you, but I only have 5. I'm disappointed. I'm hearing I don't know, I don't remember, I don't recall, I don't believe, who know, you don't even know who investigated the case, but yet you say it was investigated, but you don't even know who investigated. I'm puzzled by that. You're not instilling a lot of confidence in this panel and the people across this country. But I want to go back to your aversion to the word target or targeted. And you said there was no targeting because there was no intent. Notwithstanding the intent of IRS personnel, would you not agree that certain groups were treated differently because of their name or policy position?
So I believe, sir, that the majority...
Were groups treated differently? That's the question. Because of their belief, policy position, or their name?
No.
That's a yes or no question. No?
Sir.
They weren't. No one was treated differently.
May I answer? I would like to be a little broader than a yes/no. I understand your view, sir. My understanding of the cases that went into this queue is that it included elements from throughout the political spectrum. That of the 300 cases that were looked at by the Treasury Inspector General, 70 of the 300 had Tea Party in the name.
Okay.
My understanding is that the organizations that got...
Mr. Miller?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Miller, it's my time, and I'm going to take it back for now. I'm not going to be delayed here. So your answer was no. No one was treated differently. But to take you back to Mr. Ryan's question, you knew that groups with the term Tea Party had been automatically subjected to extra scrutiny. You've admitted that today. You acknowledged your investigation into whether certain groups were being treated differently, whether there was intent or not. Didn't this committee have the right to know?
I answered all questions truthfully, sir.
Didn't this committee have the right to know that groups were being treated differently? That you have this group of 200, 300, whatever the number was, did not this committee have the right to know?
I answered all questions I was asked.
So your answer is a non-answer once again. It's an easy question. Do you not think that Congress has the right to know all of the information that you knew?
So look,
does this committee, Mr. Miller, does this committee have the right to know the information that you knew? Yes or no?
This committee
yes or no?
Always going to get that information.
TIGTA was. But you testified before this committee, Mr. Miller, and did not. Please, Mr. Miller.
Yes, sir.
You testified before this committee, and you did not provide the information. You did not share the information you knew. So my question is, do you not believe that this is the United States Congress here that you're accountable to, which is accountable to the people, the American citizens across this country? Do you not believe that it's your job to provide us with the information that you knew so that, as you said, the people of this country can be properly served honestly? You're a law enforcement agency, for crying out loud. I was a cop for 33 years. Now, you've raised your right hand today. Did this committee have the right to know what you knew? Yes or no?
I answered all questions truthfully. I also will tell you that it was...
Let me ask. I'm going
to
go to Mr. George because my time is... You're not going to cooperate with me, Mr. Miller, and you've been uncooperative during this hearing. Mr. George, we've heard that an early draft of your report indicates that you were unable to determine who initially directed the IRS employees to target groups based on their political beliefs. Is that true?
That we were unable to, correct?
Yes. Mr. Miller, you're the commissioner. Who is responsible? You conducted the investigation. Who was responsible?
I don't have that name, sir. I tell you.
Why don't you have the name?
That I was originally...
Have you asked anybody?
Yes, I asked.
Who did you ask?
I asked.
You don't have that name either.
I'll be glad to provide those names.
Let him answer the question.
Mr. Levin, it's my time.
Washington State's time.
Who did you ask?
I asked the senior technical advisor.
And what's the senior technical advisor's name?
Nancy Marks.
And what did Nancy tell you? Who's responsible?
That I don't remember, to be honest with you.
You don't remember again?
All right. Time has expired. The committee will, there are votes on the floor of the House of Representatives, so the committee will recess for 15 minutes.